What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to do a full story video, and this full story video is all about X-Men. Now, X-Men is Nate Gray from the Age of Apocalypse reality, who had came over into the main Marvel universe. And so I kind of felt like it'll be a good idea to do a full story video of his early days in the main Marvel universe, seeing him trying to adjust to a brand new reality that he is not used to, but also meeting all the different X characters in this reality, like Charles Xavier, Rogue, and also Cable himself, his main Marvel Universe counterpart. And so with that being said, guys, here is today's full story video. I do hope you enjoy. You know, when it came to Marvel Comics, you could tell that in the 1990s, they realized what was their cash cow, which was the X-Men. Like, with all the different X books that we had covered so far in our coverage over the X-Men, and we're only in like 1995 going into 1996, you can tell that they were trying their best to push anything they can when it came to the X-Men. Now, we all know why, because they had some issues going on with the company, but there were so many different X titles: X-Men, Excalibur, Uncanny X-Men, X-Force, X-Factor, Wolverine, Cable. Like, you had all of these other books. But then in 1995, they said, you know what? Let's go ahead and add in another book, and we got X-Men. Now, technically, X-Men comes out of Age of Apocalypse. Now, I do know there's some folks out there who don't like the idea of me recovering old information, but like, just in case we have anybody jumping into our coverage leading into the Onslaught storyline, I want to make sure to understand what is exactly going on with all these different characters. And that would be Nate Gray as well, because for Nate Gray, he comes from a different reality, better known as Age of Apocalypse. Let me explain. So when it came to Legion, as we all know, the dude went back in time to kill off Magneto, but unfortunately, he had killed off Charles Xavier. And with the death of Charles Xavier, it brought in a brand new timeline, better known as Age of Apocalypse. Now, with this brand new timeline, we were given brand new versions of different characters that we love and care for, like a new version of Wolverine, our Cyclops, our Jean Grey. But for Cable, things had to be a tad bit different, because for this new reality, there was no Madeline Pryor. And for Cable, Madeline Pryor is technically his mother, and Scott Summers is his father. But his new reality, there was no Madeline. So how can we bring Cable into this reality? Well, for Mr. Sinister, he kind of realized that, if Scott Summers and Jean Grey had a child, that child would be very powerful. And so what he did was he created Nate Gray by taking DNA samples of Scott Summers and Jean Grey. And with those samples, he created, of course, good old Nate. And Mr. Sinister was correct. Nate Gray was very powerful, but here's the thing, because when it came to the end of Age of Apocalypse, that reality was going to die. Now, you did have a few characters being able to leave that reality and go back to the main Marvel universe. So, for example, Dark Beast and Sugar Man. Now, those two characters, they had arrived 20 years in the past. But for Nate Gray and Holocaust, they had arrived in the present in the old timeline. And so when it came to Nate Gray, we're technically picking up with him arriving on Earth in the present day, right after you had Legion Quest in Age of Apocalypse. Now, something else we have to remember, that for Nate Gray, he does not have the techno-organic virus in his body. And so for Cable, who has to use most of his powers to keep that virus at bay, for Nate Gray, he's a free man to use all his powers whenever he wants to. Well, technically, he's still learning how to use his abilities. But that kind of leads us into the opening pages for issue number 5, where it's Nate Gray just arriving on Earth. Like literally, he just crashed. He's getting up and kind of wondering like, where in the world is he? Now, for Nate, he still kind of believes that he's in his reality, on his Earth. But as he kind of walks around, he slowly begins to realize that there's something off about his surroundings. Like, for example, he sees snow. He's kind of like, wait a second. This is snow. It's cold. Okay, you know what? Let me continue to walk around to figure out what exactly is happening to me. Now, as he walks around, he does walk onto a road where, of course, you do have his driver crash into him. Now, the driver does pull over, and the driver say, you know what, let me make sure that he is okay, which, of course, Nate is okay. But for the driver, he's kind of wondering, where in the world did Nate come from? Now, while you have the driver trying to help Nate out, well, that is when you have Nate kind of begin to remember different things from the old reality. Apocalypse, his son Holocaust, the last battle he had against Apocalypse before he came into this reality. It's all crashing into his mind all at once, but he still believes that he's still in his old reality. And so when he looks at the driver, he's kind of like, hey, are you working for Apocalypse? But for this driver, he has no idea what Nate is even talking about. But he does run away because Nate powers begin to kind of go a tad bit crazy. Now for Nate, he does realize that he has to continue on, but also kind of find some answers as well. Now, luckily for Nate, there's a town nearby in Switzerland. And so for him, he continues on and heads over to that nearby town. But with Nate using his powers, we kind of have a small callback to what Ford said to Nate in the Age of Apocalypse reality. Every single time Nate tries to use his powers, he's kind of like a beacon for trouble, meaning that other people will come after him sooner or later to hopefully use him for their own personal reasons. And so we jump over to the X-Men, Charles Xavier and Bishop. Now, technically, when it comes to Charles Xavier and Bishop, they're not going to try to use him in a negative way, but it's Charles kind of realizing that there's somebody powerful now on Earth. He's kind of like, that right there, that power, it scares me. But now he's unable to pick up on Nate Gray because Nate has cloaked himself from other people who may find him. But as we switch over to Nate Gray in Switzerland, it's Nate now kind of walking around and kind of slowly realizing that he's somewhere completely different. Like, for example, he sees children. Now, yes, he did see kids in his past reality, but when he sees these kids, they're outside having fun. They're playing, and that's completely different for him. But on top of that, he also sees small TVs and shopping windows as well. He's kind of like, wait a second, where in the world am I? What in the world is going on? And also, you have people speaking a completely different language that he's used to. And so for him, it's him having a hard time understanding that he's no longer at home. He's now in a brand new reality. But at the same time, he's still a young boy because he was created by Mr. Sinister, who kind of kept him locked away for a short period of time. And then Forge tried his best to kind of help Nate grow into an adult mind state. But either way, it's Nate slowly trying to figure out things. Now, luckily, he does find somebody. He finds a guy known as Sven. And Sven says, you know what? Come with me. Now, at first, Sven was going to ignore Nate. But Nate powers kind of changed the mind of Sven to help him out. And so you have him take Nate over to his house. Now, right after you have Sven leave, you have Nate powers kind of go a tad bit crazy again. Not like to the point where he might blow something up, but he's having a hard time controlling his abilities. And so earlier, without there calling for help, his powers did reach out to other people who were somewhat similar to him. And so his powers had reached out to somebody we have not seen since X-Men Inferno. And that would be Madeline Pryor. Now, as we dive into the next chapter, we're picking up with the Sugar Man. Now, the Sugar Man is one of those characters who had arrived into this reality. But like I said earlier, the Sugar Man and Dark Beast, they had arrived in this reality 20 years in the past. And so for Sugar Man, he had been working behind the scenes when it came to Genosha. Now, I'm not going to sit down and try to explain the whole idea of Genosha for this video, but just know now who the Sugar Man, he wants to go after good old Nate Gray. Now, he's going to use a character known as Rex. Now, we have seen the alternate reality version of Rex when it came to Age of Apocalypse. And that version is more of like a follower to Apocalypse. But this Rex in this reality is more of a mercenary that Sugar Man just hired to go after Nate, to bring Nate to him. And of course, Rex is down with the idea. But as we switch back over to Nate Gray and Madeline Pryor, it's the two characters trying to figure out one another. Now, it does seem like Madeline did come here to help out Nate Gray, but at the same time, she might have something else up her sleeve. Unfortunately, we have no idea what that could possibly be. But we also get the idea that she does not remember everything from her past. Now, we also get the idea that she does remember some things, but not everything. And so she's not trying to share much information to us as the readers, but also information to Nate as well. Now for Nate, he wants to make sure that she is not a spy for Apocalypse or for Mr. Sinister. Now, before he says that last name, he does tell her, like, you look like somebody I saw in my old reality, better known as Jean Grey. Now for Madeline, she pretends she has no idea, like, who Jean Grey is. She does say, like, you know what, the name did sound familiar, but unfortunately, I have no idea who that is. But the way it was drawn, you're kind of like, no, she does know who Jean Grey is, but does not want to tell him anything at all. Now, once you do have Nate say the name Mr. Sinister, she begins to freak out. And that is why I say some things are locked away deep into her mind, but some are there on the surface. It's kind of like she just had a flashback of all the bad things he did to her over the years. And so you have Nate trying his best to calm her down, but now it's him kind of realizing that maybe they came to one another to help each other out and heal each other's mind. But while you have those two characters trying their best to heal up, you have Sven trying his best to get a drink at a bar to fully understand what happened earlier when it came to him meeting Nate Gray. Because at first, he was not going to help Nate at all, but something changed in his mind. We already know most likely it was because of Nate. Now, as soon as he begins to talk about Nate, that is when you have a guy walk into the bar, and that would be Rex. And for Rex, he's like, oh, this is perfect because now I can figure out where this Nate guy is at and hopefully finish the job that I was given. Now, the Sugar Man is not the only person who had picked up on Nate Gray. It is also a character known as Blacksmith. Now, Blacksmith is closer to Cable. As a matter of fact, he's just like Cable, came from the far future. But for Blacksmith, he picked up on the powers of Nate Gray, but also now picking up two signals. Now, we're kind of left to believe that the second one is most likely Madeline Pryor. And speaking of Madeline Pryor, you have Nate believe that he has the ability to heal her mind. And so you have Nate try to dive into her mind to begin that process. The problem is that when he does begin to probe her mind, well, he does pull out this, I want to say, a psionic energy construct that just takes the form of havoc, a dark form of havoc. And so we get this idea that is her slowly remembering different things from her past, especially when it comes to the character like Havoc, her last second lover at the end of X-Men Inferno. Now, with all that being said, she also remembers that she does not like the X-Men. Now, the rest of this chapter is really more of Rex being able to find Nate. Now, for Nate, lucky for him, he had some time to recover after trying to probe the mind of Madeline. But once he was able to recover, he kind of realized they're being confronted by a guy known as Rex who wants to bring them in dead or alive. Now, this battle is very short-lived because how powerful Nate Gray truly is. Rex is nowhere near his level. And so you have Nate defeat Rex, and Madeline and Nate begin to leave. But for Rex, he's not going to give up that easily. His main goal is to continue to hopefully find Nate and bring Nate back over to the Sugar Man. Now, as we dive into the final chapter for this video, we do see another character getting involved in this storyline, and that would be Celine. Now, technically, we have not seen her since the upstart organization had kidnapped her and tried to kill her as a way to get some points, but now she's free again, and she kind of picked on something very powerful nearby. And you would think like, okay, she's going after Nate Gray, but in reality, she's going after Madeline Pryor. Now, for a brief moment, we kind of jump back over to Nate Gray and Madeline. Now, the two characters had ran away over to, I want to say London, but either way, you have the two characters kind of being able to build a bond with one another. Now, for Nate, he's flying around with her in his arms, but he does kind of lose control of his powers again, where they do kind of crash into a fountain. Now, here's the thing, because it does kind of seem like the book is trying to build a certain kind of bond, but not like, Madeline Pryor trying to be his adoptive mother, but more kind of like possible girlfriend, because technically for Nate Gray, he's not related to Madeline at all. He's from a different reality where in that reality, there was no Madeline Pryor at all. But either way, it does seem like these two characters might become something special with one another. But while you have that bond being built, you have Celine continue to watch over them. And really for Celine, she's kind of intrigued by Nate, but she's more intrigued by Madeline Pryor. Now, for Celine, around this time in Marvel Comics, she was still part of the Hellfire Club. She was the Black Queen. But for Celine, she's kind of like, listen, Madeline is very powerful. But unfortunately, she does not remember anything from her past, it seems like, or the power that's locked away inside of her. And so now for Celine, it's her goal to find a way to unlock that power that has been locked away in the body of Madeline. Now, for the Sugar Man, this dude being very impatient at the moment. The whole idea of just waiting for some kind of update from Rex is really bothering him. And so he's kind of hoping in the possibility that Rex will be able to take Nate Gray down, but bring Nate over to him. But while you have Nate and Madeline trying to have dinner, you have Madeline see a woman. Now, we already know it's Celine. It's Celine calling out to her. But when you have Madeline ask Nate, does he see that woman over there? Of course, for Nate, he does not. He's kind of like, what are you talking about? There's nobody there at all. But again, for Nate, he wants to help out Madeline. So you do have the two characters leave the restaurant to go investigate what Madeline had possibly saw. Now, while you do have our two characters walking away, they don't realize they're being followed, again, by Rex. And for Rex, he's just waiting for the right time to get close enough to hopefully take down Nate and most likely Madeline as well. But for Nate Gray and also Madeline Pryor, when they do arrive at the location where Madeline has saw, well, of course, Celine, they can't find her. They run into other people who are not really important at all. But you didn't have Celine appear, but kind of cloaked, making sure her face cannot be seen at all. And you have Celine show Madeline this necklace, saying, look into this necklace, and what do you see? And of course, for Madeline, she sees a face. Now, for Celine, this is the beginning of her trying to bring Madeline over to her side, because she says, most people are not really able to see anything at all that's hidden inside the necklace, which means they're powerless. But for you, because you saw something, it means you have a gift. Come with me. Now, she does hand Madeline the necklace and disappear. And the reason why, because Nate appears. Now, for Nate, he wants to know what in the world is going on. But for Madeline, she does not want to tell him anything at the moment. But while you have Madeline running away, Rex is still there. And you have Rex try to call in and give an update over to the Sugar Man. Now, Sugar Man's not happy, but the problem is right now, the two characters are not really able to communicate with one another. And the reason why, because well, at first it seems like, okay, there is a lot of static, but in reality, it's Celine saying like, hey, Sugar Man, leave her and him alone, especially her. Stay out of this because I'm going to need both of them, but most likely Madeline more than Nate. But Celine was able to get Madeline alone once again. And when she does, it's really her saying like, you were destined for greatness in the past, but your life was cut short. But now you have been given a second chance. And with that second chance, I want to help you reach brand new heights when it comes to your power. And so it's her convincing Madeline to leave with her. So Celine and Madeline, they disappear just like that. By the time Nate Gray gets there, it's too late. Madeline is gone. And so it does hurt him so much because this time he felt like he found somebody who was special to him. And the book ends on that note right there. And so with that being said, guys, please leave. Okay, so this might be a short video, and the reason why, because we're going to see X-Men finally meet another character from his reality. Because remember, when it comes to Nate Gray, yes, he is technically the counterpart to Nathan Summers, better known as Cable, but for Nate Gray, he comes from a different reality, the Age of Apocalypse reality. Now, to Nate Gray, he believes at this point in time that he is the sole survivor of his reality. In reality, he's still trying to figure out where in the world is he. He does not fully understand that he's in a completely different reality at the moment. But for Nate Gray, he has not truly met anybody from his old reality until this two-part story arc. Now, in our last video for Nate Gray, he had met Madeline prior, and really in that short period of time that he was able to spend with her, he kind of built a bond with her where technically he was kind of in love with her. But either way, she had left with Celine, leaving him alone once again. And so you had Nate get a job to be a handyman on this sea cruiser. Now, while trying to be a handyman, you do have this young woman wanting to hit on Nate. And for Nate, he's like, hey, I'm single and I do need someone here to kind of distract me from missing Madeline. But he also remembers that he's not allowed to kind of mess with the guests on a sea cruiser. And so he does kind of decline her offer to have some alone time. But at the same time, it seems like he does not want to get involved with anybody else. Still somewhat heartbroken to me when it comes to missing Madeline. Now, for a brief moment, we jump over to a character known as Blacksmith. Now, Blacksmith is just like Cable from the far future. As a matter of fact, both characters are from the same clan, better known as the Ascani. Now, for Blacksmith, he was sent back in time to kind of continue to watch over Cable. But the problem was that over time, he had detected someone very similar to Cable. And of course, that would be Nate Gray. And so for Blacksmith, he wants to investigate this new signal that he's currently picking up at the moment. But as we transition back over to Nate Gray, we're really seeing more Nate Gray enjoying the food and the drinks on the boat, which is really meant more for the guests on the ship. But like for Nate Gray says, heck, why not? And so he goes ahead and eats and drinks a lot of food in one session. Now, you do have other crew members see him and they do try to stop him, but he begins to use his powers against him and kind of realize what he's doing right now is completely wrong. And so he does use his powers to make every single crew member on the boat completely forget what they had just saw when it came to him using his powers against, well, them. Now, there is another character we have to talk about, and that'll be a character known as Rex. Now, when it comes to Rex, he works for the Sugar Man, one of the other characters who came into this reality from the Age of Apocalypse reality. Let me explain. See, when it came to the very end of the Age of Apocalypse reality, you had the Mcron crystal being able to send a few characters over into this reality. Now, the first two were Dark Beast and also Sugar Man, and they had arrived 20 years in the past. But Holocaust, the son of Apocalypse from the Age of Apocalypse reality, and also X-Men, they had arrived in the present day. But Sugar Man realized how powerful Nate is and wanted him for himself. And so he sent Rex to hopefully complete the job, to bring him over to Sugar Man. Now, for Nate Gray, when he does wake up after his lovely time drinking and eating, he does see his reflection in the mirror, except he has this image appear where it does look like he's slowly dying off. He's just skins and bones, and that's really it. Now, once he's able to see his reflection once again, he does look normal again. Now, for Nate, he begins to walk around the boat to kind of see how the rest of the crew is doing, except when he walks outside, he realized that every other member of the crew has been killed off, and of course, has been killed off by Rex. But this leads into a battle between the two characters. Now, while you do have the two characters battling against one another, you didn't have Nate kind of learn from Rex here that Rex was sent here to grab Nate for the Sugar Man. Now, for Nate, he has no idea who the Sugar Man is. As a matter of fact, when it came to our coverage over Age of Apocalypse, it's really well known that for Nate Gray, he had never met the Sugar Man at all. And so for Nate, he has no idea who Rex is even talking about. But it does get to the point where you do have Rex being able to get his gun right underneath the chin of Nate Gray. And Nate really can't do anything at all. And so it does seem like Nate is going to die. Now, if you're probably wondering if Nate's supposed to be a stronger version of Cable, then why is he struggling so hard when it comes to Rex? Somebody who's not really that powerful. Don't worry, the next chapter kind of explains why Nate is not really able to reach his full potential. But either way, at the very last second, you do have Nate be saved by the person who's going to explain everything to us, and that would be Dark Beast. And so as we dive into the next chapter, right off the bat, you have Dark Beast trying to explain things to Nate Gray. Like, hey, listen, you and I are from the same reality, the other Earth, the whole Earth called Age of Apocalypse. Now, here's the thing, because for Dark Beast, Nate Gray knows him very well, because while being near the pens, you heard people talk about Sinister, but also talk about Dark Beast, because in that other reality, for Dark Beast, Sinister was kind of like a mentor for him as well. Most of the things Dark Beast had learned came from Mr. Sinister. But either way, for Nate Gray, he knows what's up right now. That Dark Beast is trying to trick him so they can use him for his own personal gain. Now, let's not forget about Susan, the girl who hit on Nate Gray earlier. She's still on the boat, one of the last few survivors on the boat. But once she does walk outside, you do have Dark Beast grab her and use her as a hostage, but also kind of use her as an example. And here's the reason why. Because in the other reality, Age of Apocalypse, mutants were first class. Humans were second class. Now, that world was a very dark world. But Dark Beast is trying to explain that in this reality, things are completely different. Like, yes, it may look better for everyone here in this reality, but in reality, humans are first class, mutants are second class. And remember how mutants hunted humans down in the Age of Apocalypse reality. It's Dark Beast now saying it's the other way around. We as mutants are being hunted down by humans. We are hated on by humans left and right. And for Nate Gray, he does look into the mind of Susan and kind of realize what Dark Beast is saying is technically true. And right now it's her kind of freaking out because she's being held as a hostage by a mutant, and the guy she hit on earlier is, well, a mutant as well. Now, for Blacksmith, he's still trying to figure out what's going on when it comes to Nate Gray, because for Blacksmith, he remembers Strife. He remembers the clone of Cable without the techno-organic virus being in Strife. He saw how powerful Strife was. So now you are talking of the possibility of somebody else who's almost or possibly more powerful than Strife on Earth. But the rest of the book is really more a Dark Beast telling us why Nate Gray has been showing us weak spells or moments in time where he's not really able to continue to fight on at full strength, because Mr. Sinister had placed safeguards in the body of Nate Gray to make sure that just in case Nate Gray was able to take down Apocalypse over in the other reality, to make sure Nate Gray still be somewhat controlled, because without Nate Gray being controlled, could the world actually handle someone who's more powerful than Apocalypse? Now, yes, Nate Gray is a good person, but the possibility of him turning evil and he's more powerful than Apocalypse would be a very dangerous thing to leave out there in the world. Now, with all that being said, you do have Nate Gray defeat Dark Beast, but then he remembers that there were a certain group of people who could possibly help him. And of course, he is thinking of the X-Men. And so now he's heading over to the home of the X-Men to see them for the first time in this reality. Okay, so it's time for us to go ahead and get back into our coverage over X-Man. Not X-Men, X-Man, because Nate Gray is going to be very important for the next few videos we're going to do on the channel. Now, we're going to jump back over to his solo series with issue number 8 and issue number 9, because this kind of kicks off the whole idea of X-Men finally meeting other characters from this reality. Now, technically, he already did somewhat, but now it's him kind of meeting the major characters like Charles Xavier, the X-Men, and also there's a 2-part story arc in our next video where he meets Excalibur. But for right now, it's X-Men going up against Charles Xavier, but also meeting Rogue. Now, this is kind of picking up where our last video had left off at when it comes to Nate Gray, because in our last video for Nate, he was confronted by Dark Beast. Now, let's not forget that Dark Beast and Nate Gray both come from the same reality, better known as Age of Apocalypse. Now, in that reality, Mr. Sinister was the one who had created Nate Gray as a way to take down Apocalypse in that reality. But here's the thing. Dark Beast also found out that when it came to Sinister, he put in safeguards in the body of Nate Gray, because for Nate, someone so powerful enough to take down Apocalypse, what would happen after? Somebody with that kind of power would be dangerous for the entire world. But either way, with both characters now being in the main Marvel universe, it's really more now Dark Beast saying like, hey, you should join my side, because in this reality, mutants are not first class. Humans are first class. Mutants are second class. They're hated on by the human race. And so for Dark Beast, he wanted to change that. Now for Nate, he knows how evil Dark Beast is because he heard about Dark Beast. But either way, once you did have Nate defeat Dark Beast, he left, and his goal was to head over to the home of the X-Men to see if they can possibly help him. And so that is where our video kind of picks up at, because you now have Nate Gray trying his best to fly over the ocean over to America to just get over to the X-Men. The problem is that he ran into a hurricane. And so right now he's having one of his spells where he begins to get weakened by using his powers too much. And so unfortunately, he does crash in the middle of the body of water. Now, luckily for Nate Gray, he does end up on the shore. And when he does, he is found by somebody who then takes him in. But now we have to transition over to the character known as Blacksmith. Now for Blacksmith, he's just like Cable, from the far future. The thing is, both characters are from the same clan, the Ascani clan. Now, here's the thing about Blacksmith, though. For Blacksmith, his main goal is to make sure that Cable stays on the same path that was laid out for him by the Ascani. And so he also came back in time like Cable did. But the thing for Blacksmith is that he had picked up on the powers of Nate Gray and realized that Nate's powers are very similar to Cable. Now, for Blacksmith, he believed that Strife has returned. And so he's kind of like, okay, if Strife has returned, that is a huge problem. But came to find out that's not the case. It's somebody else who's just like Cable, but without the techno-organic virus. But he also realized that Nate Gray is heading over to Charles Xavier. And so you have Blacksmith go over to Charles and say, hey, listen, you might have some company very soon who wants to talk to you. Now, for Nate Gray, he was found earlier on the shore by some kind of sheriff of the nearby town that he was in. And you have the sheriff take Nate over to a nearby prison. And the reason why, because to just give him a bed. Now, once you do have Nate wake up, you had this guy say, you know what? Let me go ahead and go out of my way to feed you because it does look like you are starving. And I did find you in the middle of that hurricane storm. Now, jumping back over to Charles Xavier and Blacksmith, this is the first time these two characters are officially meeting one another. Now, for these two characters, they begin to discuss how they both detected the powers of Nate Gray. Now, for Charles, he had picked on Nate Gray weeks ago when Nate Gray had crashed on Earth after leaving the age of apocalypse reality. The problem for Charles was that Nate Gray was able to cloak himself, so Charles was not able to figure out where Nate Gray was at. Now, for Blacksmith, we already know how. Thanks to machines out there that have picked up on somebody who's very similar to Cable. Either way, it's the two guys saying like, we should come together and find this person because this person is really powerful. More powerful than Cable, but more powerful than Charles Xavier. And that right there is kind of scary. Now, for Nate Gray, it's still him trying to discover what this world is truly like. And let me explain, because for Nate Gray, it's him now with the sheriff at this diner. Now, while at the diner, the conversation of how humans hate on mutants came up very quickly, because you do have Nate Gray find a newspaper. In that newspaper, it talks about the legacy virus, how it evolved and now going after humans as well. And the sheriff who saved Nate earlier says, listen, I hate the idea of the legacy virus killing golf humans, but I don't mind the virus killing golf mutants. Now for Nate Gray, he's kind of like, wait a second, you just saved my life earlier. Let me tell you right now that I am a mutant. And you have everybody in the diner to stop what they're doing and look at Nate Gray like, what? You're a mutant? Disgusting. This is the first example of Nate Gray experiencing hatred towards him because he is a mutant. But now we had to switch over to Charles Xavier and also Blacksmith. Now for these two characters, they're beginning to freak out. And the reason why, because, well, they got to find Nate Gray at a faster rate. Now, luckily for Charles, he has his astral form. And so you have Charles use the astral form as a way to go locate Nate Gray, to at least kind of observe him, but then kind of have a conversation with Nate Gray as well. But for Nate Gray, he's beginning to freak out because he kind of realized that, yes, in this reality, mutants are hated on by the human race a lot, to the point where he's kind of like, oh, y'all don't really have an actual reason to hate on us. It's just because we are different. That right there is not okay at all. But you also have Nate Gray use his powers to make every single person in this building forget that he was even there. Now for Charles, he saw that happen and kind of realized how powerful Nate truly is to just blink and make everyone forget that he was even there. But right after that, you didn't have Nate Gray detect the presence of Charles Xavier. And this kind of leads into a battle between the two characters. And the reason why, because to Nate Gray, he believes that Charles is actually an enemy. And matter of fact, you have Nate Gray pull Charles out of the astral plane to do battle against him. Now, for Charles, he's trying his best to convince Nate that the only reason why he's here is to help Nate, to help him control his abilities, like Charles has done for other people in the past. Now, you also have Charles tell Nate, like, hey, listen, I am Charles Xavier. I am the leader of the X-Men. But for Nate Gray, in his timeline, there was no Charles Xavier. And the reason why, because remember, Legion Quest led into that alternate timeline, the Age of Apocalypse timeline. Because for Legion, he went back in time to kill off Magneto, but he had killed off Charles Xavier instead. That what created that alternate timeline. And so for Nate, he never met Charles. To him, the X-Men were led by Magneto. And so you have Charles realizing that he has to dip out and try a different method as a way to bring Nate Gray into the fold of the X-Men. Now, after all of that, you didn't have Charles Xavier go back to his physical body. Now, when he does, it's really more of him now being confronted by Blacksmith, where he does tell Blacksmith, like, hey, listen, so that plan right there did not work out at all. And so now for Nate Gray, it does seem like he will no longer trust the X-Men, no longer trust Charles Xavier, because in this reality, the X-Men are not being led by Magneto, by somebody else completely different. Now, the next issue, we're really going to pick up with a character known as the Executioner. Now, for the Executioner, he is a character who don't really hate mutants. He just hates the idea of bad mutants. He believes that bad mutants should be punished in the way of, well, death. And so if you are a mutant, you kill somebody, in his mindset, you have to die. And so we currently see him right now plotting to go after one particular character, and that would be Rogue. And so now it's time for X-Man to meet Rogue for the very first time in Marvel Comics. And let's not forget that for Rogue, at this point in time, she's no longer part of the X-Men. She left the team behind because back at the very end of Legion Quest, her and Gambit had kissed. Now, when they had kissed, it gave her the ability to look into his mind because they believed the world or universe was going to end. But of course, it did not. But of course, with her looking into his mind, she saw some of his dark secrets. It had made her freak out and wanting to leave. And so at this point, it's just her on her own away from the X-Men. But while you have Rogue just trying to mind her business, you didn't have Nate Gray crash nearby her. Now here's the thing, because for Rogue, she wants to make sure that Nate Gray is okay. The dude just crashed right next to her. But the thing is, you have Nate tell Rogue, like, hey, listen, I'm a mutant and you need to stay away from me. Now, for Nate Gray, it's him kind of believing that all humans across the world truly do hate on mutants a lot. And technically, he's right, but wrong at the same time. There are a lot of humans out there who do hate on mutants a lot, but only a few, not all the humans. But he looks at Rogue as another human, not knowing that one, she's Rogue, and two, she is a mutant. Now, when he tries to read her mind, it does become a problem. You see, for Rogue, over the years in Marvel Comics, she had touched a lot of people, and that's technically a problem because with her powers, when she does touch somebody else, she does absorb their powers, but also their memories as well. And sometimes their personas go into her mind. And so technically, inside her mind, there are many different personas of different people, including hers in her own mind. And so for Nate Gray, when he tries to read her mind, it's like a battleground with all these different personas just battling against one another in the mind of Rogue. And it makes him freak out. Now, it does end up with Rogue being able to knock him out to allow him to get some rest, but to also have him calm down a tad bit. Now, for Charles Xavier, he does kind of realize that Nate Gray is not Strife. So they're not really fully concerned all the way like they should be when it comes to Strife. But they also kind of still feel concerned because Nate Gray is still young, a young boy with the powers of Cable, but without the idea of the techno-organic virus getting in his way. And so you have Charles say, I have to let everyone know about this powerful mutant. And so he calls up Moira McTaggart and tells Moira what he did to him in the last chapter. The whole idea of Nate Gray pulling Charles out of the astral plane. And for Moira McTaggart, she's kind of like, whoa, that's really powerful because not even the Phoenix could do that to you. That's a really powerful person there. Now, as we transition back over to Rogue and also Nate Gray, you have Nate Gray finally wake up, and the two characters are now able to have a conversation with one another. Now, with their conversation, it's really more him finding out that this is Rogue. Now, in his reality, Rogue was two things. One of the leaders of the X-Men, but two, she was married to Magneto, but back in his reality. And so in this reality, she's not with Magneto, and she's not the leader of the X-Men, but he still believes it's his Rogue. But then he remembers, oh yeah, I'm not in my reality, I'm in a brand new reality. Now, with all that being said, you also have Rogue try to tell him like, hey, listen, the X-Men are not bad people. Now, he tells her like, hey, listen, I'm trying my best to find Moira McTaggart. Now, she believes that he may have the legacy virus because why else would you go over to Muir Island for to see Moira McTaggart? But while you have the two characters talking to one another, that is when they get attacked by good old Executioner. Now, the reason why you have the Executioner going after Rogue is because, okay, there was a whole storyline going on with Rogue when it came to her powers first manifesting. When they did manifest, she was with a young boy known as Cody, a young boy that she really did care for a lot. Now, when her powers had manifested and he touched her, well, he fell into a coma and stayed in a coma ever since. Now, recently, he had finally passed on. But the problem is for the Executioner, he blames Rogue for what had happened to Cody, which technically he is right, but you do have him here trying to kill off Rogue. Now for Nate, he wants to protect Rogue, and you have Nate use his powers to fight back against Executioner, where at first he is winning, but once again his powers begin to drain him to the point where Rogue has to jump back into the battle to help him out. Now, by the end of this battle, you do have our two characters being able to take him down very easily, but just barely, and he does teleport away for another battle down the road. Now, the ending of the book is really more of Rogue telling Nate Gray where to go. Like, hey, you can find Moira McTaggart on Muir Island. So you have Nate leave to go find Moira McTaggart. Now, here's the thing, because she does call up Moira McTaggart to warn her, like, hey, you have a young mutant coming your way, and he's very powerful, but also kind of confused on how to control his powers. Now, this does lead into a two-part storyline where it's Excalibur fighting against Nate Gray, but we'll cover that storyline in a different video. But this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later. Okay, so it's time for us to, it's time for us to sit down and talk about X-Man Nate Gray going up against Excalibur. Now, this is a two-part story arc that for me personally is kind of well done. And the reason why I'm saying that, because when it comes to Nate Gray, remember that in the early days of his series, he had just arrived on the main Marvel Universe Earth, because this character comes from the age of Apocalypse reality. And so for Nate Gray, it's him now meeting almost all the different characters who are part of the X family in all his books in different moments in time. So for example, in our last video, he ran into Charles Xavier, but now it's time for him to run into Excalibur. And the reason why he's heading over to Muir Island is because for Nate Gray, he kind of realized that sometimes when using his powers, he does feel completely drained to the point where he's not really able to continue on to use his abilities. Now, he also heard about the legacy virus. Now, remember, the legacy virus is killing off mutants left and right, and technically, it's now going after humans as well, even though we only have one human case at the moment, and that would be Mohamed Tagger. But for Nate Gray, he believes that the reason why he's getting exhausted or possibly getting weaker is because he might have the legacy virus. And so Rogue told him, like, hey, if you head over to Muir Island, most likely Mohamed Tagger could be able to help you to figure out what's going on with you. Except when the man first arrives on Muir Island, he gets a huge beatdown from Excalibur. And the reason why, because over in the Hulk book, you had Hulk do something really big and major. And so for Captain Britain, he kind of believed that Nate Gray was also connected to the Hulk incident and believed him to be some kind of terrorist. And so that's why he was kind of like, hey, Excalibur, we got somebody on the island and I have no idea who that person is. And so you had Excalibur beat him down until you have Mohamed Tagger step in and say, stop. This man is our guest. I knew he was coming because Charles Xavier had called me up. And so now it's time for Mohamed Tagger to begin to work on Nate Gray. Now, once you do have Nate Gray wake up, he does talk to Mohamed Tagger about why he's there on Muir Island. And he does tell her, like, hey, listen, I kind of feel like the legacy virus inside of me because every once in a while, when I try to use my abilities, I get these major headaches, but also I feel completely drained. I feel weakened. And so for Mohamed Tagger, being one of the few experts on the legacy virus, she agrees to help him out. But first, the dude needs to eat and relax a tad bit. Now, we also learned that Mr. Sinister is also looking for Nate Gray as well. Now, for Sinister, he does call up a character known as Trinity. Now, for Trinity, we met her a while back in our coverage over the X-Men. You see, she has the ability to absorb the energy of a dying person and turn that energy into a blast. Now, Sinister was able to help her, but he also kind of hooked her up into his entire system to collect information across the entire world. And so for Sinister, he's kind of wondering, has she heard anything at all about Nate Gray? Now she lies here and says, no, I have not heard anything at all. But the reason why she lied is because she wants to use Nate Gray as a way to break away from Mr. Sinister. But as we get back over to Mohamed Tagger and also Nate Gray, we see Mora being able to finish Nate's test. And we do kind of find out, no, he does not have the legacy virus at all. But the questions are still there. Like, why in the world does he get weak after using his abilities? Why does he get major headaches after using his abilities? So many questions left up in the air. Now, once you do have Mora say, you know what, go ahead, get some rest, get some food. I will look over your test to see if I'm able to find the answers to our questions. Now, as he does leave her lab, he kind of realized there's somebody else, another mutant locked away. He's kind of wondering, like, why is there a mutant locked away for? That right there seems weird to me. But then he goes outside and he finds Wolfbane. Now for Nate Gray, he does know a tad bit of information about Wolfbane, and the reason why, because Mohamed Tagger was talking about her earlier. Now remember, when it comes to Wolfbane, she's technically the adoptive daughter to Mora, but for Wolfbane, she said while being on Muir Island, Mora would tell her all these different types of stories and the possibility of treasures being out there nearby the island. And so for Nate Gray, he kind of wants to help her see or find those treasures around the island. So he grabs her hand and they fly away. Now, as they do fly away, you have Mohamed Tagger tell us, the readers, that for Nate Gray, he does kind of remind her of her own son, Proteus. Now, that right there is very important. And the reason why, because Proteus was a very powerful character. The problem is that Proteus died a while back in our coverage over the X-Men. So kind of hinting at the idea that possibly Nate could die. And really, the next page kind of gives Moira McTaggart that right to be concerned, because while you have Nate Gray using his abilities to help Wolfbane find, different artifacts around the island, different treasures, well, while using his powers, his nose begins to bleed. And that right there is another hint at the idea that there's something wrong with Nate Gray. And as we go back over to Moira McTaggart, we see her on the phone with Charles Xavier. Now, with her being on the phone with Charles Xavier is where we learn that Nate Gray is dying. And the reason why? Because of his powers. And you see, when it came to Mr. Sinister, the one from the Age of Apocalypse reality, the one that had created Nate Gray, he put in safeguards to make sure that once Nate was able to get rid of Apocalypse, then there's some kind of way to bring Nate down to allow Sinister to continue on with all his different ideas. And so for Nate, that is why he had those headaches. That is why he feels weak after using his abilities, because he is slowly dying when he does use his powers. But things are about to get a whole lot worse, because remember, Nate Gray detected another mutant that was locked away at the base of Excalibur. And of course, that would be Spore. Now, Spore is a mutant that has the ability to play with your emotions. Now, he was locked away because earlier he attacked the base of Excalibur. But either way, once you do have Nate find Spore, he asks Spore like, hey, why in the world are you down here? And you have Spore tell Nate a story in a way where it's kind of like Excalibur is keeping him down there as some kind of prisoner, but he's down there against his own will. That technically he's the good guy and Excalibur are the ones who are the bad guys. And so for Nate, he kind of realized, or his head, he thinks he realized that once again he has been played like he has in the past. He believes Excalibur is just as bad as Dark Beast or the Sugar Man or even as the X-Men. And so you have Nate head right over to Moira McTaggart. And this is the perfect example of the idea that Nate Gray, with him being created in a lab by Mr. Sinister, he honestly does not have a lot of life experience. And the reason why I'm bringing that up because he's jumping to conclusions before he has all the pieces. You see, when he goes over to read the mind of Moira McTaggart, he finds the right pieces of information to make him believe that Spore is correct, that Spore is the good guy and Excalibur is the bad guys. But the problem is that he did not try to talk to Moira McTaggart to get a better idea of what's actually going on. Because of him being irrational, he begins to attack her. And so for Nightcrawler and Colossus, while they're outside talking to one another, they just watch her entire lab get blown up, kind of wondering, did Nate Gray just kill off Moira McTaggart? Now, the second half of this storyline does take place over in Excalibur issue number 95. We're getting very close to issue number 100, but we have to skip over a few pages because really the first few pages are more kind of like a review of the whole idea of Excalibur. But getting into the actual story, the first couple of pages we can actually talk about does take place before you had Nate Gray blow up Moira's lab. So for example, we pick up with Kitty Pryde and also Pete Wisdom. And really more is Kitty Pryde trying her best to explain things to Pete Wisdom of the whole idea of why Colossus had attacked him in our last Excalibur video. And really for Pete, he's kind of like, I don't really care how you try to explain it. The man was completely jealous of the fact that you had moved on and got with me. And speaking of Colossus, we do jump over to him and Nightcrawler, who are currently just outside talking to one another. And for Colossus, he kind of realized that nobody on the team is really trying to talk to him except for Nightcrawler. And really, it's more Kurt saying like, dude, you just attacked one of our team members because you were jealous. Like, give it some time. Don't worry. Sooner or later, the rest of the team will come around. Now, while you have the two characters talking to one another, that is when Moira's lab blows up. So now we have caught up and we're back in the present day. Now, really, the rest of the book is really more of Nate Gray kind of realizing that he's at the wrong here because you do have Moira McTaggart saying like, dude, You're being irrational. You're not really trying to sit down and figure out what's going on. You hear one piece of information, you take that one piece of information and you run with it. And you do have more explain what is actually going on. Like, for example, Spore is a bad guy. His abilities have made you believe what he wanted you to believe. But on top of that, it's also her saying, like, I have seen people like you, mutants, who are really powerful, but unfortunately so powerful, their own powers end up killing them. And it's her saying that we're not here to kill you. Your own body is going to kill you. Like, matter of fact, you might die by the age of 21. Now, for Nate Gray, he begins to read the minds of all the different members of Excalibur. Now, with him doing that, it's kind of him getting a better idea of realizing where Excalibur stands at. It's him kind of realizing that, oh, I am completely wrong, that these people are truly here to help me and other people like me out in the world. And so you do have the book kind of end on the note where you do have Nate Gray tell Moira McTaggart that he's leaving to find a friend, but to also kind of build on his life experience, which honestly is completely zero. But it's really more him saying, like, he is sorry for what he did, but he needs to understand what kind of person he is and what this world is truly like. But this is where we're going to end today's comic book videos. Okay, so it's like time for us to but to get into Cable versus X-Men. Now, technically, there is a prelude that kind of leads into the actual battle between these two characters. Now, this was really huge for Marvel Comics. And the reason why, because Cable was really popular in the 1990s. But then out of nowhere, you had Marvel introduce another version of the character who came from a different reality. And that version has all the potential that Cable could have been if he did not have the techno-organic virus. And so we're going to cover Cable issue number 29 and X-Men issue number 13 because, like I said, these two issues are really more like the prelude that leads into the actual battle between the two characters. And so as we get into issue number 29, we really pick up with Cable kind of looking at this horribly drawn picture of Nate Gray. And for Cable, he kind of realized that this other version of himself have already met a few other people in his life. Charles Xavier, Moira McTaggart, and I guess you can go ahead and say the Sugar Man as well. And so for Cable, he kind of realized this is somebody he has to find very soon. Now, while you have Cable kind of looking at this picture, you see Cable look outside to see his team, X-Force. They're out there training, getting ready for their next mission down the road. But then out of nowhere, you then have Blacksmith arrive. Now, for Blacksmith, just like Cable, he's also from the far future and part of the Ascani clan. Now, for Blacksmith, a very powerful psychic. And so you have him being able to walk out and block the minds of all the different members of X-Force to kind of make sure they won't be able to remember that he was even there. Now, he then runs into Sunspot, and this is a callback to an earlier storyline because for Sunspot, he was kind of this evil person known as Rainfire. And so what Cable did was he reached deep in the mind of Sunspot to get rid of that other personality. The problem is that for Sunspot, he had now gained the ability to speak Ascani. And so for Blacksmith, he's kind of like, one, I'm not able to block your mind like I want to. And two, how in the world are you able to speak Ascani? Now for Cable, he's not really ready to tell Blacksmith how that's even possible at all. He says, hey, come inside because now time for us to have our meeting. Now, this is a small meeting, so you have Cable, Blacksmith, Charles Xavier, Moira McTaggart, Cyclops, Jean Grey, and also Storm. Now, with all these different characters coming together, of course, they're here to talk about Nate Gray because for Charles and Moira McTaggart, they had some run-ins with Nate Gray, but also Morbid Taggart was able to kind of run a few tests on Nate and kind of realize how powerful he truly is. That apparently he's so powerful he rivals the Phoenix when it came to, well, the fake version of Jean Grey being the Phoenix. But either way, it's them saying like he's really powerful, that he's everything Cable could have been if Cable did not have the techno-organic virus. Now, with all that being said, it was also Morbid Taggart who also realized that Nate is dying. When it came to Sinister in the other reality, better known as Age of Apocalypse, he made Nate Gray powerful enough to take down Apocalypse, but he also made sure there was a safe way to deal with Nate Gray just in case he gets too powerful. So for example, his own powers are slowly killing him off, which matter of fact, he should die by the age of 21. Now, for Blacksmith, he went out of his way to block the minds of himself and also Cable to have a private conversation. Now, Jean Grey and Charles, they had quickly picked up on that. And so you had Charles kind of realize they're trying to hide something here. And the thing is, they're kind of right, but not really. And let me explain, because for Charles Xavier and Jean Grey, they're right because Blacksmith's trying to hide something, but not really Cable. Because the Blacksmith, this is a Scani business, which means no one else should be involved. And the only reason why he is saying that because Nate Gray is technically Cable, but from a different reality. But also Cable right now is on some kind of path the Ascanis had put him on. And so it's Blacksmith saying, no, you have to handle him. They cannot get involved. And so he used his powers to alter the minds of Charles Xavier, Jean Grey, Jean Grey, Cyclops, Morbid, Taggart, and Storm to make them believe they came together to talk about the legacy virus. But in reality, that's not the case. Now, the book also tells us that sooner or later, Cyclops and Jean Grey are going to remember the original reason why they came here for a meeting. But for Cable, he's kind of like, fine, I'll go ahead and go after Nate Gray by myself. But I'm telling you right now, Blacksmith, this kind of ends the whole idea of you and I working together. And the reason why, because Cable realized that for Blacksmith, he has been tracking Nate Gray for a while, which means Blacksmith could have told Cable a while back, but Blacksmith did not do that. And so for Cable, it's kind of like you had just broken the trust we had between one another. But either way, for Cable, he's now on the hunt for Nate Gray. Now, this kind of leads us over to X-Men issue number 13. Now, with issue number 13, we pick up with a character known as Trinity. Now, when it comes to Trinity, she has this ability where she's able to feel the energy of somebody dying. And when she does absorb the energy from that person, she's then able to release that energy as some kind of powerful blast. Now, we met her a while back in our coverage over the X-Men, where you technically had the X-Men hand her over to Mr. Sinister, where he did help her. But the problem is that once you're part of Sinister's plan, he will never let you go until he feels like you're basically useless to him. And so when it came to Sinister, she realized she had to escape, which she did. But the problem is that she's now being followed by his soldiers, better known as the Marauders. Now, for Nate Gray, he's also in Paris, and so is Trinity as well. But for Nate Gray, it's really more of him trying to figure out what is his next move, but at the same time, try to fully understand how to control his feelings. Because remember, he was created in another reality, better known as Age of Apocalypse. But on top of that as well, when it came to Sinister creating him, he kind of aged him up. And so for Nate Gray, he was not really able to fully understand how to be a person and have a normal conversation with somebody, but to also handle his feelings. Now, on top of that, for Nate Gray, he found out by Morbid Taggart that he's going to die. And so it's him trying to understand when that is going to happen, because his powers are killing him off slowly. But while you have Nate Gray thinking, he does pick on somebody calling out to him, and that would be Trinity. But for him, he believes it's Madeline Pryor calling out for him. But then he sees a huge explosion. Now, once he does find Trinity in that explosion, he also finds the Marauders. Now, this is where he learns that in this reality, there's also a Mr. Sinister. But in his reality, Sinister died. And matter of fact, before he did die, he had killed off Nate's version of Forge, who was kind of like a father to him. And so to come to this reality to find out that technically Sinister is still alive, it really does bother him a lot. But he also kind of gets the picture that in this reality, Mr. Sinister is still a bad person. And so you have Nate go out of his way to protect Trinity against the Marauders. Now, there is one member of the team who does kind of mess with the powers of Nate, and that would be Scrambler. But with him trying to do that to Nate Gray, it does cause a huge explosion right in the middle of the city. Now, that huge explosion was also seen by Madeline Pryor. Now, in the earlier parts of our coverage over X-Men, he found Madeline. And matter of fact, he fell in love with her. And she kind of fell in love with him. But she was taken away by Selene for Selene's personal plans. And so, unfortunately, even though she sees the battle happening across the city, she does not go out of her way to reunite with Nate at all. She stays with Selene. Now, the rest of this issue is really more of us just seeing Nate Gray just going off against all the different members of the Marauders, to the point where you technically have Nate killing every single one of them off except for one. One does survive, but for the rest of Marauders, they have been officially killed off. And you have Nate being able to leave with Trinity to go somewhere else. But here's the thing, because like I said, this is a prelude, because right after you have Nate and her walk away, well, Cable was nearby. It's Cable following the powers of Nate Gray, hoping to find him very soon and take care of this situation between the two characters. But this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later. Okay, so guys, unfortunately, I got sick once again, where honestly, it kind of sucks because you would think like, you know what, springtime, there's a good chance I don't get sick, and somehow I still get sick. But either way, we're going to sit down and finally cover Cable versus Nate Gray. Yes, X-Men versus Cable. This is a storyline I kind of been waiting for a while. Like, as we went through our coverage over the X-Men, I kept wondering like, okay, when are these two characters finally going to meet? And they finally do in this 3-part story arc, but they're also fighting against another character known as Exodus. Now, for me personally, this makes the battle even better with him being there, because it's the 1990s. When it came to Marvel, they're really trying their best to push this character out more when it came to X-Men comics. And honestly, the opening pages for issue number 30 is a good example of that, because we do pick up the Black Knight and also a few other knights 800 years in the past. Now, the Black Knight does not really play a major role in this storyline. It's just him and a few other knights walking by this forbidden area. And so as we jump over to the present day, we do learn that forbidden area was locked away because Exodus was inside there for 800 years. And so as we get over to the present day, it's him now going back to where he came from to hopefully regain the power that he had lost in the last few storylines that we had covered. But now we have to transition over to Cable. Now for Cable, he's kind of nearby Exodus, but he's not looking for him. He's looking for Nate Gray, because for Nate Gray, he's on the radar for a lot of different people. The Sugar Man, Dark Beast, Blacksmith, Cable, the X-Men. And so for Cable, his main goal is to hopefully find Nate Gray to help out Nate Gray. Now for Blacksmith, who's Cable's close friend from the far future, he believes that Nate should die. Now we'll explain why later on in this video, but while you have Cable getting closer and closer to Nate Gray, he begins to kind of connect his mind to Nate Gray's mind, but not on purpose. It's complete accident. But with that happening, you now have Cable kind of look into the past of Nate Gray, but being very confused. confused because he has no idea that Nate is from a different reality, the age of Apocalypse reality. And the same thing goes for Nate Gray as well, because for Nate, it's him now kind of reliving different moments from Cable's past as well, seeing all these different flashbacks. Now, for Nate Gray, he does try his best to stop what he is seeing, but luckily for Nate, he has somebody nearby him, and that would be Trinity. Now, for Trinity, Nate had helped her in our last video escape from the Marauders, because for Trinity, she had a hard time controlling her ability. You see, for her, she has the ability to kind of absorb the energy of dying people and turn that energy into a blast. But she had a hard time controlling that powers. Now, when it came to Sinister, he helped her. As we all know, if you belong to Mr. Sinister, he will continue to use you until he feels like you're no longer good use for him for anything else. And so she wanted to escape, and she did, thanks to Nate Gray. Now, with all that being said, she realized that Nate just went through something very major. He's weak now, but for Nate Gray, something is calling out to him. And so they continue to travel throughout the mountains, the same areas that where Cable and Exodus both are at. But this is where I kind of want to transition back over to Cable, because you do have Cable now meet up with Blacksmith. Now, here's the thing, because for Blacksmith, the reason why he wants to kill off Nate Gray, because he looks at Nate Gray as a mistake, somebody or something that should not be around at all. That matter of fact, it should be completely erased from this timeline, because there should be only one Cable in this timeline, and that's you. Now, yes, there is Strife, but Strife is a clone. This person right here is not Strife, which means this person is a huge mistake that should not be in this reality. If he is, it could cause problems for us down the road in our timeline, but also for your plan that was laid out for you by the Ascani. And so it's Blacksmith saying, Nate Gray gotta go. But getting back over to Nate Gray, you have Nate find one of the many bases that were left behind by Cable over the years in this timeline. And so for Cable, this is one of his homes. And Nate Gray's kind of like, why in the world did I come here for? And you didn't have Cable walk into the room and kind of explain like, hey, the reason why you came here is all because of your and I connection, because we are just alike. Now, let's not forget, for Nate Gray, he was created by Mr. Sinister back in the age of Apocalypse reality, but also he was aged up at a very fast pace. And so unfortunately, the dude never truly learned how to be a person, how to handle his feelings. And so for him, when he sees Cable, he's kind of like, great, you're somebody else that's trying to use me. You're saying that we are just alike, but I don't believe you. Now, once you have Nate try to, or he does, connect his mind to Cable's mind, he kind of realized what Cable said is true. But at the same time, realize there's some kind of connection with Cable to Apocalypse. And let's not forget, for Nate Gray, his reality, Apocalypse had ruled over North America. But it was Nate Gray helping out the X-Men defeat Apocalypse in that reality. And so for him, he's kind of like, what is your connection to Apocalypse? Now, while you have Nate Gray doing the Cable, you didn't have Blacksmith say, hey, we got bigger problems coming in right now. But for Cable, he truly can't focus on the other problem at the moment. And so you have Cable trying his best to just reach out to Nate Gray. Like, hey, I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to actually help you, because we are literally the same person, just from different realities. But Nate Gray is not trying to listen. He believes, once again, there's something going on behind the scenes when it comes to Cable looking for him. And so you have the two characters trying to talk, but you didn't have Nate Gray cause a huge explosion. And so to close on the first chapter, that other problem that Blacksmith said earlier, yeah, that was Exodus, who just arrived as well. And so as we dive into X-Men issue number 14, it's really more Cable waking up after the explosion. Now for Cable, he is completely worried about Nate Gray. Like, yes, Nate Gray is really powerful. Nate Gray is what Cable could have been if Cable did not have the techno-organic virus. But here's the problem. Exodus absorbs energy. And so for Nate Gray, yes, he has all that energy inside of him, but all that energy he's using right now is just being absorbed by Exodus. Now, here is another problem because with Cable being nearby, their minds are connected to one another. And so for Nate Gray, it's kind of like fighting two things at once. A major headache because of Cable, but also fighting against a powerful character like Exodus. Now, for a brief, I say literally a brief moment, we get reminded about Madeline Pryor because remember, Madeline Pryor was madly in love with Nate Gray when she first appeared or reappeared back in this series. And so for Madeline, after meeting Nate Gray, she was taken away by Celine. And so it's her just thinking about Nate Gray and missing him. That's really it. I mean, there is a point in this part where she does cut herself, but she doesn't realize she did cut herself until somebody tells her, and then she feels the pain in her hand. And she's kind of confused on why in the world did she not notice that she cut herself. But then we kind of transition back over to the battle, right? Now, the rest of X-Men issue number 14 is really more us just seeing Nate Gray fight against Exodus. And you have Cable trying his best to get back in the battle, but to also kind of help out Nate Gray. But for Nate Gray, it's like, no, I fight alone. I don't fight with nobody at all, which technically is not true because in the past he did fight alongside with other people, but like whatever. But either way, it's Nate saying like, no, I'm gonna go ahead and fight on my own when it comes to Exodus. And so for Nate, he kind of realized what he could do here, which is just keep feeding the energy he puts out to Exodus, because at some point Exodus can't take all the energy that Nate Gray is pushing out. And so it gets to that point where you do have Nate Gray just feed too much energy to Exodus and completely wipes him out. And so you didn't have Nate open up a crack in the earth, throws Exodus in that crack in the earth and closes it. And so for the time being, Exodus had just been put on the back burner. But after doing that, you didn't have Nate Gray shift his focus back onto Cable. Like, okay, he's done. Now back to you because there's no way that you are me. And so as we dive into the final chapter of the storyline, we're now kind of getting to the idea that it's just Nate Gray releasing all the power side of him all at once. And so you have Blacksmith say, we literally have to kill him right now because if we don't, it could do some serious damage across the world. I'm meaning like frying people brains across the world. If there are psychics across the world, they're going to feel his energy. Now, you have Blacksmith go ahead and try to kill off Nate Gray, and Nate Gray puts the man down quick and fast. And so for Cable, he's kind of like, okay, Blacksmith said I have to kill the guy off, but at the same time, it's just a boy. What is wrong with us? Why are we trying to kill off a young boy who's still trying his best to discover how to be a person, how to be a mutant? But Cable's right, because if you are psychic or somehow able to pick up on the energy of Nate Gray, you are feeling that energy in your brain. Now, Holocaust, he's first. And for Holocaust, he comes from the same reality as Nate Gray does, Age of Apocalypse. He recognizes the energy. He's kind of like, that guy right there is my enemy. He's here as well too. This is a problem. But besides that, you have Psylocke, Jean Grey, Cyclops, not Cyclops, Charles Xavier. But either way, they're all feeling that energy. Now, let's not forget, because in an earlier storyline, the preludes that led into this storyline, it was really more Blacksmith wanting the X-Men not to know about Nate Gray, or really not have a meaning about him. Because for Blacksmith, he wanted to make sure that Cable was the one to handle Nate Gray. Nobody else, not the X-Men, X-Force, just Cable. And so when they came together for a meeting, everyone came there to talk more about X-Men. Blacksmith said, nope, y'all came here for the legacy virus. Cable, let's go. But now it's Jean Grey and Charles Xavier beginning to remember what actually happened. And so now they're freaking out because now it all comes down to Cable. If Cable fails, there goes everyone across the world possibly. But as we get back over to the two Nates here, you do have Cable begin to realize like, okay, for me to actually fight against Nate Gray, I have to use my powers. But for Cable, it's completely different. Most of his powers are being used to keep the techno-organic virus at bay. And so for Cable, he's kind of like, I have to let go some of that power to allow myself to use that power instead to fight against Nate Gray, to get into his mind. Now, this is Nate Gray saying like, you don't understand though, Cable. I am dying. My powers are killing me. But it's Cable saying, dude, shut up. Like, I'm just like you, just older. But the thing is, I'm dying a different way than you are. You know, you're dying because, well, your body was made like that. But for me, I have this virus that's just going through my body at a very slow pace, thanks to me using the power that I have. Now for Trinity, again, she has the ability to figure out when someone is dying, feel their energy. And so she's like, hey, his powers is killing him. Cable, you gotta stop Nate Gray. And so you have Cable being able to just do it. And this kind of leads into the ending of the storyline because you do have Cable begin to try to fix the mind of Nate Gray to hopefully save his life. But while doing that, Blacksmith says, hey, you gotta kill him off now. But for Cable, he no longer trusts Blacksmith. And matter of fact, that trust was very thin. But in the preludes that led in the storyline, it was Cable realizing that Blacksmith knew about Nate Gray, but didn't tell Cable at all. And so for Cable, it's kind of like, I cannot trust you. And now I kind of realize if somebody's out there you think is an enemy, then most likely they can become an ally for me. But either way, it's Cable just fixing the mind of Nate Gray. Now, there was a point where he did push himself too far and he could have died, but he did live. And the book actually, there's still one more page we got to talk about. Because now we jump over to a character known as Post. Now, here's the thing, because this character does first appear over in X-Men issue number 50, but the thing is, we have not really covered that issue just yet. But just know that this character right here is currently working with Onslaught. So again, another small hint of the idea of the next crossover to come for the X-Men down the road. But this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.